In this video, we'll talk about Blockade. Blockade is a strategic position where a piece blocks an opponent's pawn, therefore preventing it from advancing. It is a form of restriction to limit the enemy pawn activities and in general denies the opponent some space on the board. The strategic position is usually seen in the middle game, and sometimes in the endgame with pawns. In this position where the middle game is about to take place, White just played Rook e1 with the idea of playing e4, breaking the center with e4 at some point. While we see that even though White hasn't developed all his pieces yet, look at the bishop on c1, still undeveloped. It is often acceptable to directly break the center first, immediately gaining some space and force over there. Well, the bishop on c1 can be developed anytime later on, as it's not restricted anyway. So, if black easily allows white to play e4, white will have a strong pawn in the center. Much worse if he can play e4 and then proceed with e5, and then the center is going to be on white's grasp. So black somehow needs to do something about it that will result him in good and playable position. One idea for black is to play bishop to f5, and this is a fine move. However, white can harass it with a tempo move knight to h4, and opening its light square bishop, only helping the e4 break. Therefore, the more typical move for black is not bishop f5, but rather knight to e4. Now, this move blockades white's e-pawn from going into the e4 square. And not only it prevents white's e4, it also helps black's own bishop to be more active and open its own diagonal by occupying the f6 square later on. Also, bishop to f5 becomes more possible as there will be no knight to h4, right? So, knight to e4 is a blockading move that gives black playable position in the middle game. If after knight takes e4, then there's d takes e4. And knight goes to d2, and after f5, this gives black slightly better position. By blockading an enemy backward pawn, one gains the control over the square in front of it, and causes it to remain a backward pawn for a long time, and many times will become a target of attack that can be won over. In this game, white immediately played knight to e5. Actually, this is a multi-purpose move. Other than giving the queen instant access to the king side and preventing black from castling queen side because of the knight f7 fork, white also blocks black's backward e-pawn. Now, so black needs to either develop his knight to f6 or capture the knight on e5. Either way, white will maintain a strong control over the e5 square and use the entire e-file to attack backward weakness there, backward e6 pawn. Now, if black decides to exchange the knights with knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, the knight to f6. By the way, bishop to f6 is not possible because of queen to h5 check, right? So, knight to f6 should be played. And then there's rook to e1. And if black decides to make his light square bishop more active by playing, for example, bishop to c6, that's a more active decision for the bishop to, position itself. Then this e pawn here, a backward pawn, can be attacked with perfect timing later on. Okay, so let's go back. How about black will not capture that knight on e5 right away, but instead play knight to f6. Still, rook to e1. If black plays bishop to d6 to contest that knight on e5, then simply knight to d2 and then going to f3 and will solidify that control on that important central square. Haven't you noticed that the knight is most popular blockader? Well, that's true. In fact, other than establishing itself in a blockading square to limit the enemy activities, a knight can also be used as a defender of dangerous pass pawns. Knights are the best blockaders of pass pawns. A knight can stop an enemy passer in its tracks and still remain active, due to its ability to jump over other units. In this game, we can see both sides having protected pass pawn. White's bishop is blocking black's pass pawn, but it has virtually no activity or scope. On the other hand, black's knight is not only blocking white's pass pawn, it is also attacking the enemy pawns on e4 and c4. Even after, bishop to c2, protecting that e4 pawn, defending the e4 pawn, black will play, for example, bishop to, or rather, queen to f4. And the queen will penetrate into the enemy position and cause white all sorts of trouble later on. This game demonstrates the same power of a blockading knight. Black boasts a strong pass pawn on the e-file, but after white's knight to e3, black's passer has been switched off. Now the knight on e3 not only stops black's e-pawn, it also guards important squares, the c4, the d5, and the g4. If black is not careful and plays knight to d5, for example, then the purpose is to get rid of this blockading knight. Then after knight takes knight, rook takes knight, this pawn on e4 will fall. Well, don't give all the high praises for the knight as a blockader. The bishop has its own heroic deeds in the blockading end of the chess world too. Sometimes, a bishop can become an effective blockader when dealing with pawns on the sides of the board, rather than the center. In this game, we see an example of a bishop blockade. It's white's turn to develop either of his remaining minor pieces. Well, he could play knight to c3 or bishop to d3. And these are fine, important moves in the opening. But here, white sees an opportunity to fix or blockade an enemy a-pawn by playing bishop a6, so that it can't gain queenside space with later a7 to a5. Now black's a-pawn will become a passive target on a7. Well, let it take a step towards freedom, right? Surprisingly, it's not just about the minor pieces that could take the role of a blockader. In pawn endings, and you should remember this pattern, especially when tempos are crucial, a pawn can become an effective blockader against its counterparts. In this endgame, if white were to move, he would win immediately with h4. Because black's king is outside the square of the pawn, right? Remember the rule of the square? Now, but black to move here can fix the whole white's king side with a simple g4. Of course, white can't move any of his pawns, right? Because of the en passant. Okay? So, after g4, okay, white is forced to move his king with king to a3. Then king b5. After king b5, king b3. a4 check, king a3, king a5, king a2, king b4, king b2, a3 check, king a2, king a4, king a1, king b3, king b1, a2 check, king a1, king a3. Now what happens next is that white is in zugzwang and has to move his h or f pawn. And in the end, black will promote first and will have a checkmate at the 8th rank of the board. Now let's try this middle game position if you can guess the best move for black. You can pause the video and try to analyze how black should continue the game. Alright, congratulations if you found a move, knight c4. Now this is a simple yet effective move in order to deal with white's strong d passer. The idea of knight c4 is apparently to eventually go to d6. Now that is a blockading move for the knight. As it maneuvers back to d6, that is a better square for the knight who stops the d pawn and improves its scope in the position. Well, I hope you learned something from this video. If you found this helpful, please apply it to your game, leave a like, and follow this page.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.